struggled a lot in high school. I remember getting lots of assignments and homework that made no sense to me, but the only reason I did them is because the teacher asked me to. I felt a lot of what I was learning was pretty much there to get a passing grade and not something I'd be using in life later on. It was pretty hard to get motivated. So, what do we do as teachers? How do we make the learning more interesting and relevant? Well, one way to address it is with a learning situation. A learning situation is a way for learners to learn something, well, more specifically, develop competencies in a context that matters to them. And I just don't want to gloss over develop competencies. That's a really key point about a learning situation. In the past, we pretty much asked students to memorize stuff, memorize facts, and then recall it a couple of weeks later on the exam. Alternatively, if you're developing student competencies, you're giving them the skills to problem solve on their own, to mobilize all sorts of different resources to come up with a solution on their own. Okay, so let's bring that back now. If I had to come back to a learning situation and say, what are the key points in a learning situation? I would say number one, it helps develop student competencies. Number two, it's authentic. It's a situation you put them in that could happen in their real lives. Number three, the tasks or questions you give them are student-centered and open-ended. You're not asking them to figure something out that only has one answer in one specific way. And last but not least, number four, the learning situation is in line with the CCBE or DBE programs, which means you're following the guidelines of your course. Now, what does a learning situation look like exactly? Well, depending on the course you're teaching, it's going to look very different. But physically, it's just a piece of paper with instructions on it. But it's the instructions you're putting on the paper. Those are very different from what you used to do before. That all being said, there's no rule that says you have to do the instructions on a piece of paper. You could do them as a video or a podcast, whatever you want really. A learning situation can vary in length, how long you expect your students to work on it, but in my opinion, shorter is better. Try not to make a learning situation that goes on and on and on and on. Break it up into smaller parts if need be, different learning situations. When you're writing a learning situation, you don't necessarily need to set your questions and tasks in a specific order as to lead your students to have that aha moment. In fact, if you find that your instructions are leading your students too much, I might go on a limb and say that your learning situation is a little bit too guided. A good learning situation should also try to allow students to take advantage of technology to reach their goals. That being said, if you're using technology for the sake of technology, then don't bother. Using technology should never be one of the goals of the learning situation, but merely one of the ways that the students can go about to solve a problem. Last but not least, my advice to you is to try to not base your whole learning situation around an essential knowledge concept. In other words, I need to teach this grammar concept, so I'll make a learning situation about it. No. Your best bet is to find a real-life problem or something your students are in the midst of figuring out in their lives and make a situation around that. Then when they're going through the learning situation, all the nuts and bolts, i.e. the essential knowledge, will be constructed as they go along. At the end of the day, a learning situation teaches students that they have the freedom to choose their own strategies or mobilize different resources to solve a problem. All you're doing is giving the student more control over what they want to learn and how they want to learn it.